Joining me now, Congressman Rob Wittman. Rob Wittman, Republican, representing the 1st District of Virginia. Congressman, great to have you with us.
John, great to be with you this morning.
I'm stunned by the lack of pushback on the trampling on a daily basis now of our civil rights. I just talked to a business owner in New Jersey. Their governor, Pat Murphy, said, well, even if you're an essential business and you're staying open, you now have to, in order to stay open, have a barrier in between you serving your customers, and the barrier could cost thousands of dollars. And I got a business owner on who said, I owned a dry cleaners. Yesterday I took in $26. I don't have money for a barrier. I'm going out of business. I have no money. What is going on here? Congressman, can you help us understand?
Well, John, as you know, there's a wide range of what's happening in states from locality to locality. In my mind, the whole element of this is, there has to be a balance between making sure we are doing everything possible to manage the spread of this disease, and that's exactly what this is you're not going to get to zero risk because we're human beings. We live in a society. This disease is transmissible. But the bottom line is how do you create that balance between protecting people's health and protecting their liberties, and that I think is the key. And listen, you can talk about all these things that you could do and trying to get to zero risk, but I don't think zero risk, first of all, is attainable. And second of all, if you try to get to zero risk, what other things do you give up that are innate to who we are as human beings, and that is our basic liberties and freedoms that we have, and then making sure that you create that balance there, and that I think is what you're seeing out there. And it's, as you said, it's regional. It varies from state to state, from locality to locality. You brought up Dare County as an example. You brought up what's happening in other areas of the country, and what's being done to try to prevent the spread of disease. And I understand it. This is new related to the scope and the span of what's happening before us. I think people are looking at what can we do. Listen, we live in a free and open society. There are things here that can't be done, I believe, constitutionally, that are done in places like China. You can't demand that people stay in their homes. I mean, you can give a stay-at-home order, and you can say, here are the things we want you to do. Some states have said, well, if you're out there, if we think you're not out there for a legitimate purpose, then we're going to fine you, and those kinds of things. But listen, that's up to interpretation. I mean, people have to go out to the grocery store. People have to be able to get the necessities of life. And what in one person's judgment may not be critical for the person that's actually out there moving to do something is critical for them. So again, there's an element there of judgment and what can you realistically and reasonably do that impinges upon people's freedoms and liberty that is constitutional and is in keeping with who we are as a country versus what we're doing to try to prevent the spread of disease. And I think you see a lot of questions, as you point out, being asked about, is this really a proper balance between protecting individual liberties and freedoms and managing the spread of the disease? And that's, I know, being debated on a daily basis. I hear from constituents who ask those questions about things that are being done not only here in Virginia, but across the United States. And those are legitimate questions. They're questions that I think we all have to answer, and that citizens have to weigh in on. I think citizens have to say, hey, listen, I want to make sure that I'm not, endangering my fellow human beings, but I want to make sure, too, that the things that individuals have to do for their own protection. I mean, it's not just protecting against the disease; it's basic elements: food, water, shelter, and then the discussion too, John, gets into how are we making sure that we're able to do things where people can continue to protect their businesses. Make sure that as this outbreak passes, that they have the ability to bring their businesses back into operation. Now, we're trying to do some things to help businesses, but but it is not going to be the 100% solution to getting those businesses back to where they need to be. And then as you begin to rescind the restrictions put in place because of this outbreak, I think the biggest challenge then is going to be the transition, because it's not going to go from all to nothing. And then for businesses to ramp back up, they're not going to be able to just start tomorrow and get all the things that they need to get back into business. If you're a manufacturer, you rely on raw materials. Are the raw material producers going to be, they are ready to go? And then again, the whole delineation between essential and non-essential, all those elements, have a reverberation throughout the economy. So, and each of those elements are all connected to the things that have been done up to this point in addressing this outbreak.
It is incredible the level of civil liberties that are being taken away, and the non-existent reaction of average Americans. Congressman Wittman, just a few months ago, we lived through, in Virginia, in the General Assembly, you were there for a long time, we lived through the caucus of Corn coming in, Eileen Filler-Corn being the speaker, all the left-wingers coming in, and we went through the gun grab, right? The reaction to that was overwhelming. I mean, we had 50,000 people at that gun rally that I covered for 9 hours. I mean, I was getting email. People were going crazy over it. Yet, in this instance, there's no outrage. And I'm just befuddled by the number of Americans that are just willing to accept these dictatorial government orders or governor orders, like from Phil Murphy in New Jersey, or from Hogan in Maryland with checkpoints and things being set up, stopping cars. In Maryland, they can stop you for no reason, right? I mean, we fought a revolutionary war over no-knock warrants, right? You just can't come into somebody's home. So you can get stopped there for no reason other than to be questioned as to why you're out. I mean, the trampling of our civil liberties is unbelievable. Everybody's just standing around saying, well, if it's going to keep us safe, it's okay. Let's get to reopening the economy. You just mentioned you can't do it in one day. What is the Rob Wittman model? When do we get, do you think, is it in May where we start to get people back to work? Because now we've got, 17 million unemployed. By the end of April, it's going to be, some people are saying, up to 35 million people unemployed in the United States.
Well, John, it's going to be a Herculean task, and there's a difference between doing the interim steps to help businesses get to the point of reopening, and I think what we're seeing across the United States is each state has addressed this a little bit differently in what the regulations are in their state and how they've addressed what businesses can and cannot do. My concern is that right now, the economy is actually in a sitting mode, so it's in a mark time mode. Now, there are some elements of the economy that are going well, the essential elements or the essential businesses as they've been defined. But if you're not essential, especially if you're in the service realm, if you're in the restaurant business, and you are at almost zero production right now. I mean, you have carry out and those sorts of things, and restaurants are figuring out a way to try to make that work as best as possible. But remember, in the United States, there's a whole entire supply chain. So it's not just if you say, okay, tomorrow we're going to lift these stay-at-home orders, things can get back to normal. And first of all, the question is going to be, what is the new normal? Second of all, is if you're in business, you need certain things to operate. And even if you're producing things, let's say a part for a production line, you need the raw materials that go into that. You need the steel and other things. And my concern is that that pipeline of those materials right now too has shrunk or has atrophied.
Right.
So if you're looking to say, hey, tomorrow I can go back into business and say I want to ramp up, I want to call all of my employees back, the basic elements of what you need to get back up to speed are not going to be there immediately. So everybody in the supply chain, all those suppliers have to get up to speed. So listen, I think it's going to take some time to do that. What I think needs to happen, if you're really going to get the economy back from sitting to standing to walking to running as quickly as possible is you have to, as early as possible, get those companies that are the critical parts of the supply chain back up and running. You have to say, okay, here's what we're going to do, and then phase it in, because in my mind, you can turn everything on at one time, but the problem is everybody's going to kind of struggle to figure out what's going on. So as you're looking at this, get the elements, the suppliers, and those elements back up and running as quickly as possible. So then when the other businesses open, they have what they need. So I think states need to define, who are the most critical elements in the supply chain, and give them the green light as this outbreak gets to the point of saying, hey, we've got risk at a manageable level now. Give them the green light to get back underway, and then phase things in so that the economy doesn't struggle to try to put the pieces back together again. Because this is just like a puzzle and dropping it on the floor and saying, okay, now how do we put all these pieces back together? And listen, after this outbreak, things are going to be different. So the question is how do you put the thought in to put the pieces back together so you can get that puzzle back together as quickly as possible? That's what I think needs to happen. Because if you just say, okay, go at it, there's going to be a lot of struggle, and the stories are going to be a business that has gotten help, let's say through the Paycheck Protection Program or the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. They've gotten all that, but now they still can't get up to speed because they're lacking certain critical elements in their business. So you're still going to find businesses that struggle even after this is gone, even after the 8 weeks of the Paycheck Protection Plan dollars have run out, because the critical elements that they need to operate may not be there the way they need them,
right,
or the demand may be so big that it can't be met. So I think there's going to have to be some thought put into how those pieces come together to make sure that the economy doesn't stumble for a longer period of time.
You're absolutely spot on, Representative Wittman. We're with Rob Wittman, Congressman, 1st District Republican, Virginia, saying that we need to get the supply chain up first so that when businesses do reopen, they have something to reopen with, because it's just not like turning on a spigot on and off. Okay, let's get to the $250 billion additional money for the Paycheck Protection Program. Tried to pass in the Senate yesterday by Republicans. All they wanted was a clean bill, because there's a fear now that the original $350 billion is going to run out, that if you didn't get your application in time, or your bank had to go through the SBA sanctioning process or whatever they've done, maybe you didn't have your act together, there was a fear that the money would run out and some businesses would not be able to get the money while others that applied earlier were, right? So it makes sense that would be augmented to me. Mm-hmm. The Democrats, though, stopped it because they wanted another $250 billion, so they held that hostage, and things that are unrelated to augmenting the Paycheck Protection Program. Does this beat with your counterparts on the other side of the aisle, Congressman? Does it ever end?
Well, John, during these times, what you hope, and listen, there has been broad-based bipartisan efforts to address this, and what you hope is that you find those areas of agreement that you can get done quickly, because time is of essence to these businesses. In fact, I've just prior to coming on today, I've been talking with some folks about the challenges that these businesses are facing in getting the dollars from the Paycheck Protection Plan, and the concern that as they struggle to put it together, if there will actually be dollars there. So there is an anxiety out there, and that itself does have an impact. I hope that we can find a place to agree. We also have to keep in mind, John, that as we are doing this is a tremendous amount of money that we are spending, and it's necessary to get this money into the right places in the economy to make sure that we can get back on track. But there's also an element of this, too, to say that, we're eventually going to have to pay this money back. So I think we all have to be mindful that you don't want to be at a point of having, other unnecessary spending elements. And some of the elements that have been put forward about additional spending that was proposed to go in this bill are elements that were already contained in Phase 3. So let's have a debate about what are the additional dollars that would need to go to hospitals? What are the additional dollars that would need to go to reimburse localities? Listen, I think that's fine, but I haven't seen anything, or I haven't gotten any information. And listen, I'm all about getting the information on how much is being spent, and are those elements of the Phase 3 bill, that is the CARES Act, have those elements begun to run out of money? In other words, are hospitals struggling to be able to keep their businesses operational because of the impact of the coronavirus outbreak? Are there elements in states where they are not able to cover the cost of the things that they're doing on distributing personal protection equipment and the other operational elements that go in there? So, listen, I think we can debate those things, but the most immediate element is in assuring that businesses have the certainty that if they need these dollars, that they can get these dollars. And like I said, I haven't seen any information that says that we are at the same critical point with the other elements of potential needed additional funding right now. So to me, you could do this stepwise. If you were to have gotten the $250 billion through, there's nothing that prevents you from saying, hey, a week later, we can get other dollars in the areas that were proposed to those places if it's necessary. But again, I want to be able to look and see, is it necessary? Because, listen, there is an impact of spending these dollars, and we absolutely have to make sure that we're helping in the areas where it's necessary to help. But we also have an obligation to make sure that we're doing that properly and responsibly. Mm-hmm. And I believe that, doing it stepwise, to me, is not a problem. Let's get the most important things done first, and you can come back and do those others. So I was hopeful that that's the way things would have ended up, but unfortunately they did not. So now we're back at square one. And again, time is of essence with this, because the more uncertainty that's out there, the harder it is to be able to get things back together to get this economy going.
Oh, you're spot on. You ought to be on. I know the president is thinking about putting an economic response team together to how to get people back to work. You ought to be in that task force, because I think you kind of understand how the pieces work and the puzzle fits together. So I hope that you have a seat at that table. I think it would be valuable. Congressman Rob Wittman with us. You're also the ranking member of the Sea Power Readiness Subcommittee in Congress. Earlier this week, Navy Secretary Modly resigned over remarks he made in the confrontation and firing Captain Brett Crozier. I know you're very involved in this, obviously, in the ranking member and then the former chairmanship that you had overseeing the Navy. What was your reaction to this, sir?
Well, listen, with all the things that had transpired and all the controversy that was created with that, I think Secretary Modly did the right thing, and let's get the Navy back on track. Let's make sure that they're focusing on the mission that they have ahead of them. They have a lot of challenges out there. They're having to move assets around, like the hospital ships, the Comfort and the Mercy, doing great work, by the way. But they're also having to deal with a force that's in a constrained space on ships around the world, and trying to manage, if you have a case of COVID-19 there, how to manage that. So, anything that takes away from the total focus to make sure you get that done is not what's necessary at this particular time. Listen, there are a whole series of elements, as I got briefed, and I talked to Secretary Modly about this as this whole thing unfolded. Listen, I understand the bits and pieces of things that happen. I understand the chain of command. I understand wanting to make sure that you maintain integrity and trust within that, but also understand, too, that once things get to a point, as they had with Secretary Modly, that it's all about doing what's best for the United States and what's best for the Navy and what's best for the sailors. And when the attention gets away from that, and when it becomes a day in and day out focus on what somebody has said or how they have said it, instead of getting the mission done, then I do think that detracts from it. And to Secretary Modly's credit, Acting Secretary Modly's credit, he said that he believed that it was at the point where, what had transpired distracted from being able to do that. So his decision to step aside, I think, clears the deck so the Navy can get right back to what it needs to be done. Deputy Secretary McPherson, that's come over from the Department of the Army as acting secretary, I think is a great immediate transition. Ambassador Braithwaite, as you know, is the nominee for Secretary of the Navy. Hopefully that moves quickly so they can get some certainty there and have continuity and leadership there, so the Navy can stay on track with the things that it has to do. It's got big challenges out there, and these distractions, unfortunately, make it more difficult for them to accomplish their mission.
When will they get done with that nominee? Wasn't Braithwaite, wasn't he the ambassador to one of the Scandinavian countries, I think?
Yes,
Norway,
he was, John, and it's
Norway, right?
I think I have to I'll have to check.
Norway.
In Norway. Anyway, it's my understanding that the administration is doing everything they can to get this nomination through the process. I think there were some comments the other day from folks in the Senate that indicated a desire to be able to clear the deck of this nomination. I think with the things that have happened there, hopefully it'll get prioritized in the Senate. They can get this done, again, to have continuity of leadership there in the Navy. I think that they need that. They need to get through the confirmation process. Deputy Secretary McPherson, now acting Secretary of the Navy, I think will do a great job, but that's not a permanent solution to this. So they have to get the Braithwaite nomination done and have some continuity and leadership there.
Give us your take on Captain Brett Crozier and his behavior.
Well, listen, Captain Crozier, was well respected by sailors, and you can tell by the reaction that was going on there. I believe, though, that there is a chain of command. In other words, he was communicating with his strike force commander, with people up and down the chain of command, giving his thoughts and ideas on what was happening, which is exactly how it's supposed to happen, because there has to be a coordinated response to that. And I think, if he had it to do over again, at least based on the external comments that I've seen, in sending this out to a large list of recipients, outside of his immediate chain of command, I think he probably looks back on that and said, probably should have done it differently. I think ultimately in his heart, he wanted what was best for his sailors. He wanted to make sure people understood the urgency of this. I think people did. He may not have been fully happy with all the things that were happening, or maybe the response he was getting, or the speed at which things were happening. Well, if that's the case, then you really have to sit down. And remember, within the chain of command, there is the ability to go around. So if he felt like he wasn't getting proper response from his strike group commander, he has the ability to go around the strike group commander to the next level of leadership and say, hey, I'm not getting what I need. I'm really concerned about this. So I think there were opportunities for him to do what was necessary to protect his sailors and to protect the ship, and to do his mission for the nation without having to go to that extent and sharing that email. So again, I think a lot of times you sit down at a computer screen, you get passionate about things, and then something goes off, and if you look at it after the fact, you say, well, maybe I should have done it to that extent. And I think that's probably where Captain Crozier is. I know Admiral Gilday, the Chief of Naval Operations, is looking at this, doing a full-scale review of what happened with that to determine, what's the next step forward with Captain Crozier. But, I do think in his heart of hearts, he was trying to do what was best for his sailors. There's a chain of command, a way to do that, and I think if he had to do it over again, he probably wouldn't have shared the letter with as many people and would have looked at other ways within the chain of command to get done what he believed needed to be done.
We're out of time. I want to thank Congressman Rob Wittman for being with us and commenting on that. Also, the Congressman is the ranking member of the Sea Power Readiness Committee in the House of Representatives of the United States. Congressman, thank you for being with us. I really appreciate the time, sir. Thank you.
Thanks so much, John. Great to be with you this morning.